Elena Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she looked across the empty fields. Once this land had been green with crops and full of cattle. Now dust devils danced where corn used to grow, and the fence posts stood like old bones in the desert sun. Her brother Carlos sat on the porch steps, holding another letter from the bank. His hand shook as he read it for the third time that morning. Elena knew what it said without looking. More debts, more threats, more promises to take away everything their parents had worked so hard to build. How much this time? She asked, settling down beside him. Carlos crumpled the paper in his fist. More than we have. More than we'll ever have. His voice cracked like dried leather. At 25, he looked like an old man, worn down by 2 years of trying to keep their ranch alive after their parents died from the fever. Elena remembered when their mother got sick. The doctor bills came first, then the medicine costs. When their father caught the same fever a month later, they had to sell half their cattle just to pay for his treatment. It didn't matter. Both parents died anyway, leaving Carlos and Elena with a mountain of debt and a ranch that was falling apart. We could sell more land, Elena suggested, though she knew they'd already sold most of it. What land? Carlos laughed bitterly. We've got maybe 20 acres left, and half of it won't grow anything but weeds. The sound of horses made them both look up. 3 men rode toward their house, dust clouds trailing behind them. Elena recognized the lead rider, Tom Harrison, the richest rancher in the territory. He owned thousands of acres and had more cattle than anyone could count. People said he got rich by taking advantage of others' misfortune. Carlos Martinez, Harrison called out, not bothering to get off his horse. I hear you're having money troubles. Carlos stood up slowly. What's it to you, Harrison? Harrison smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. I might have a solution to your problems. A way to clear all your debts and maybe have some money left over. Elena felt something cold creep up her spine. She'd heard stories about Harrison, about the people who worked for him and were never seen again, about the young women who disappeared from other failing ranches. I'm listening, Carlos said, though Elena wished he wouldn't. Your sister there? Harrison nodded toward Elena. She's young, strong, can work. I know people who need workers, people who pay good money for the right kind of help. Elena's blood turned to ice. She knew what Harrison was really talking about. Everyone knew, though nobody spoke about it openly. People who went to work for Harrison's contacts were never free to leave. She's not for sale, Elena said quickly, standing up beside her brother. Harrison's smile grew wider. Everything's for sale if the price is right. What do you say, Carlos? $500 cash. Enough to pay off your debts and start fresh somewhere else. Elena looked at her brother, waiting for him to tell Harrison to leave, waiting for him to protect her like he always had when they were children. But Carlos just stared at the ground, his face pale. I need time to think, Carlos whispered. Don't think too long, Harrison said, turning his horse around. Other people are interested in this land too. Might not be so generous next time I come calling. After Harrison and his men rode away, Elena and Carlos sat in silence for a long time. The sun beat down on them, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. You wouldn't really consider it, would you? Elena asked finally. Carlos couldn't meet her eyes. Elena, you don't understand how bad things are. The bank's going to take everything next month. We'll have nothing, nowhere to go. We'll figure something out. We always do. How? Carlos's voice rose. How do we figure this out? I've tried everything, Elena. I've sold everything we own except this house and the clothes on our backs. I can't even afford to feed us much longer. That night, Elena lay awake listening to her brother pace back and forth in the kitchen. She heard him talking to himself, arguing with voices only he could hear. Sometimes he sounded like their father, stern and protective. Sometimes he sounded desperate and afraid. The next morning, she found him sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey, even though it wasn't even sunrise yet. Carlos? He looked up at her with red, tired eyes. I'm sorry, Elena, I'm so sorry. Sorry for what? But before he could answer, they heard horses again. This time it was their neighbor, old Pete, riding hard toward their house. Carlos. Elena! Pete called out as he jumped down from his horse. I heard Harrison talking in town yesterday. You need to know what he's planning. Pete looked around nervously, then lowered his voice. He's not just talking about regular work, Carlos. He's talking about selling your sister to some real bad people. People who put chains on folks and never let them go. Elena felt the world spin around her. She grabbed the porch railing to keep from falling. Carlos buried his face in his hands. I know what he's talking about, Pete. I'm not stupid. Then you know you can't do it, Pete said. Your mama and papa would roll over in their graves. My mama and papa are dead, Carlos shouted. And their debts are going to put us in the ground too if I don't do something. Elena stared at her brother. You're actually thinking about it. You're actually considering selling your own sister. I don't want to. Carlos's voice broke. But what choice do I have? At least this way you might live. If we lose the ranch, we'll both starve or freeze to death come winter. Old Pete shook his head. There's always another choice, son. Always. But as Elena looked at her brother's desperate face, she realized he'd already made his decision. The Carlos who used to chase away bullies and protect her from thunderstorms was gone. In his place sat a broken man who saw his sister as his last way out. That night she heard him leave the house. She knew where he was going and she knew what he was going to do. Elena packed a small bag with her few belongings and hid it under her bed. If Carlos was going to betray her, she would be ready to run. But deep down she knew running might not be enough. Harrison had men everywhere, and the desert was full of dangers worse than debt collectors. As she fell asleep, Elena whispered a prayer to her parents. She asked them to watch over her, because she had a feeling her brother no longer would. Elena woke up to the sound of heavy boots on the wooden porch. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky a dull orange color. She knew this was the day her life would change forever. She heard Carlos talking to someone outside, his voice shaky and quiet. Then came another voice, rough and mean, the kind that made her skin crawl. Through her bedroom window, she could see a large wagon with iron bars like a cage on wheels. Elena, Carlos called from outside her door. You need to come out now. She had hoped, even after everything, that her brother would change his mind. That he would remember all the times she had taken care of him when he was sick, or how she had worked beside him in the fields without complaining. But the sound in his voice told her that hope was dead. Elena opened her door and stepped out. 3 men stood in her kitchen, and they looked like the kind of people mothers warned their children about. The biggest one had scars on his face and hands that looked like old rope burns. His name was Morrison, and Elena had heard terrible stories about him in town. This her? Morrison asked, looking Elena up and down like she was a horse he might buy. Carlos nodded but wouldn't look at his sister. This is Elena. She looks strong enough, Morrison said. Can she work hard? She's worked this ranch since she was 12, Carlos whispered. She can do anything. Elena couldn't believe her brother was talking about her like she wasn't even there. Carlos, please, don't do this. We can find another way, Morrison laughed. There's no other way, girl. Your brother owes more money than this place is worth. At least this way he gets to start over. One of Morrison's men stepped forward with iron chains. They were heavy and cold, made for keeping people prisoner. Elena backed away, but there was nowhere to go in the small kitchen. Please, Carlos, she begged. Remember what Mama made us promise before she died. Remember how she made us swear to always take care of each other. Carlos finally looked at her, and Elena saw tears in his eyes. But he didn't move to help her. He just stood there as Morrison's men grabbed her arms. I'm sorry, Carlos said. I'm so sorry, but I don't have a choice. You always have a choice. Elena shouted as the chains clamped around her wrists. The iron was cold and heavy, and it hurt her skin. You're choosing money over your own sister. Morrison counted out bills and handed them to Carlos. $500 like we agreed. She's not our problem anymore. As they dragged her toward the door, Elena looked back at her brother one last time. He was holding the money in his shaking hands, staring at it like he couldn't believe what he had done. I'll never forgive you, Elena said. Never. Carlos dropped the money and started toward her, but Morrison stepped in his way. Deal's done, Martinez. No changing your mind now. They pushed Elena into the wagon cage, and she saw she wasn't alone. 2 other women sat in chains on the hard wooden floor. One was about her age, with dark hair and scared eyes. The other was older, maybe 30, and she looked angry more than afraid. I'm Rosa, the young woman whispered. They took me from my family's farm 3 days ago. I'm Carmen, the older woman said. Been in this cage for a week. They got me from a town up north. In the corner of the cage sat a boy who couldn't be more than 15. He was thin and looked like he hadn't eaten in days. What's your name? Elena asked him gently. Diego, he said in a voice barely louder than breathing. They said my uncle sold me to pay his gambling debts. Elena felt sick. How many people had family members who cared more about money than blood? The wagon started moving, and Elena watched her childhood home get smaller and smaller. She could see Carlos standing on the porch, still holding that money. Even from far away, she could tell he was crying. Morrison rode his horse beside the wagon. "Don't bother trying to escape," he called to them. "We're going into the desert, and you won't last a day out there without water." But Elena wasn't thinking about escaping yet. She was thinking about survival. She shared her small piece of bread with Diego, who looked like he needed it more than she did. When Rosa started crying, Elena held her hand through the chains. "We have to be strong," Elena whispered to the others. "We have to take care of each other because no one else will." Carmen nodded. "She's right. We're all we've got now." As the day got hotter, Morrison's men got meaner. They didn't give the prisoners enough water, and they laughed when Diego got sick from the heat. When Elena asked for more water for the boy, one of the guards hit the cage with his rifle. "You'll get water when we say you get water," he growled. Elena noticed that the guards got careless when they drank from their own water bottles. They also got lazy in the afternoon when the sun was hottest. She started paying attention to everything: which guard carried the keys, how they secured the wagon at night, where they kept their weapons. That evening, they stopped at an old trading post that had been abandoned for years. The building was falling apart, but it had thick walls that would hide them from anyone traveling the main road. Morrison's men built a fire and started drinking whiskey they had brought with them. They talked loudly about what they would do with the money they would get for selling their prisoners. "The girl with the dark hair should bring a good price," one of them said, pointing at Rosa. "Young ones always do." Elena felt anger burning in her chest like a hot coal. These men talked about selling human beings like they were cattle. They didn't care about the families they had destroyed or the lives they had ruined. "Don't listen to them," Carmen whispered. "Don't let their words poison your heart." But Elena was already thinking about poison, the kind that came from hate and the need for revenge. She was also thinking about something else. Earlier that day, she had seen a bent nail sticking out from the wagon floor. If she could work it loose, maybe she could pick the locks on their chains. She had learned how to fix things around the ranch, and locks weren't that different from broken gate latches. It would take time and patience, but Elena had plenty of both. As the guards got drunker and louder, Elena started working on that nail. She moved slowly and carefully, making sure no one was watching. Rosa and Carmen saw what she was doing and blocked the view with their bodies. "You think you can really get us out of these chains?" Rosa whispered. "I'm going to try," Elena said. "And when I do, we all go together. Nobody gets left behind." Outside, she could hear coyotes howling in the distance. Their wild, lonely sound reminded her that she was far from home, far from everything safe and familiar. But it also reminded her that some creatures were born to be free, and they would fight to stay that way. Elena worked on that nail until her fingers bled, but she didn't stop. Freedom was worth bleeding for. 3 days earlier, while Elena was still free and Carlos was making his terrible decision, a man named Dakota was following tracks in the red dirt of the desert. He moved like a shadow across the landscape, his feet making no sound even on the rocks and dry brush. Dakota was Apache, born in the high mountains where the air was thin and clean. His name meant friend to all, though he had learned that not all people wanted his friendship. Some people only wanted to hurt others, to take what wasn't theirs, to put chains on those who should be free. He had been tracking Morrison and his men for many miles. This wasn't the first time he had followed slave traders through the desert. It wouldn't be the last. Every time he heard about people being stolen from their families, Dakota felt a fire burn in his chest that wouldn't go out until he did something about it. A year ago, his own sister had disappeared. Ayana was her name, which meant forever flowering. She had been gathering berries near their camp when strangers took her. Dakota searched for months but never found her. The not knowing was worse than death, because death at least had an ending. Now he made it his job to save others from the same fate. His Apache band understood. They had all lost someone to the slave traders who moved through their territory like poison in the water. Dakota could read the desert like other people read books. The bent grass told him how many horses had passed. The depth of the tracks told him how heavy the wagon was. The scattered stones showed him where someone had tried to hide their trail but hadn't been careful enough. Morrison's group was moving slowly because of the wagon. That was good. It meant Dakota could catch up to them before they reached whatever terrible place they were taking their prisoners. He had seen the wagon from a distance the day before, and it made his stomach sick. Iron bars and chains, like something built for wild animals instead of human beings. Through the bars, he could see people sitting inside, but he was too far away to see their faces clearly. Dakota followed them through the day, staying far enough back that Morrison's men wouldn't spot him. He knew this desert better than they did. Every rock, every hidden water source, every place where a person could hide or make a stand. When the sun started going down, Dakota climbed to the top of a tall rock formation where he could see for miles in every direction. He watched Morrison's wagon stop at the old trading post and saw the men make their camp. Even from far away, he could tell they were drinking and getting careless. That was when he got his first good look at the prisoners. There were 4 of them. 2 women, a young man, and what looked like a teenage boy. One of the women had long, dark hair and a proud way of holding her head, even with chains on her wrists. Something about her reminded Dakota of his lost sister, but it was more than that. As Dakota watched through the falling darkness, he saw the woman share her food with the younger prisoners. When the boy got sick from the heat, she used her own small piece of cloth to wipe his face. When the other woman started to cry, she put her arm around her shoulders. Even in chains, even facing a terrible fate, this woman was thinking about others before herself. That took a special kind of strength. Dakota made his decision. He would save all of them if he could, but if something went wrong, if he could only save one, it would be her. He climbed down from the rocks and began to move closer to the trading post. Years of hunting had taught him how to move without making sound, how to become part of the shadows and wind. His grandfather had taught him that a good warrior was like water. He could flow around obstacles and strike where enemies least expected it. The Apache way was to watch and learn before taking action. Dakota spent hours studying Morrison's men, counting their weapons, figuring out their habits. 3 guards, all of them drinking too much. 1 man by the fire, 2 others walking around the camp but not paying close attention to anything. They had rifles and pistols, but their reflexes would be slow from the whiskey. They were cruel and mean, but they weren't smart or careful. Men like this always made the same mistake. They thought their victims were helpless, so they stopped watching for danger. Dakota saw the woman working on something in the wagon. She was trying to pick the lock on her chains with what looked like a bent nail. She was brave and clever, but even if she got free, she and the others wouldn't survive long in the desert without water or weapons. That was where Dakota could help. As the night got deeper and Morrison's men got drunker, Dakota moved even closer. He could hear them talking now, saying terrible things about what they planned to do with their prisoners. Every word made the fire in Dakota's chest burn hotter. One of the guards said something about the woman with dark hair, something that made Dakota's hands tighten on his bow. He had heard enough. These men had taken their last prisoners. Dakota knew he could kill all 3 guards if he was careful and quick. His arrows never missed their targets, and in the darkness he would be invisible until it was too late for them to fight back. But he also knew that gunshots and screams might bring other dangers. This part of the desert sometimes had army patrols or other groups of slave traders. The last thing he wanted was to save these prisoners only to have them captured by someone else. He would wait for the right moment. When the guards were most careless, when their attention was furthest from the wagon, that's when he would strike. In the meantime, he watched the woman continue to work on her chains. She was determined and patient, 2 things that would serve her well in the life ahead. Whether she knew it or not, her old life was over. Even if she escaped, even if she went home, she would never be the same person who had been put in those chains. Dakota understood that feeling. He had been a different person before his sister disappeared, more trusting and less angry. Terrible things changed people, sometimes for the worse, but sometimes if they were strong enough, terrible things made them into exactly who they needed to be. As he watched the woman in the wagon, Dakota had a feeling she was the strong kind. The kind who would survive whatever came next and maybe help others survive too. He settled in to wait for his moment, his bow ready and his heart calm. Tomorrow there would be 1 less group of slave traders in the world, and 4 people would have a chance to be free again. The desert wind whispered through the rocks around him, and Dakota whispered back a prayer to his ancestors. He asked them to guide his arrows true, and to give the prisoners strength for what was coming. Freedom always came with a price, and tomorrow that price would be paid in blood. Elena worked through the night. her fingers raw and bleeding from trying to loosen the bent nail from the wagon floor. Every few minutes she had to stop and pretend to sleep when one of the guards walked by, but she kept coming back to that nail. It was her only hope. By the time the sun started to rise, she had finally worked it free. The small piece of metal didn't look like much, but to Elena, it might as well have been made of gold. Rosa and Carmen watched her with growing excitement as she began to work on the lock that held her chains. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Carmen whispered. Elena had fixed plenty of broken latches and locks back on the ranch. Her father had taught her that most locks work the same way. You just had to find the right spot to push. "I think so," she said. "But even if I get these off, we still need to get out of this cage." Diego, the young boy, looked more hopeful than he had since Elena met him. "Maybe we can do it," he said quietly. "Maybe we can really get away from these awful men." The guards were tired from staying up late drinking, and they weren't paying as much attention as they should have been. Morrison was snoring loudly by the dying campfire, and the other two men kept yawning and rubbing their eyes. Elena felt something click in the lock. Her heart jumped as she felt the chain loosen around her wrist. She had done it. She was free from the iron that had held her prisoner, but she didn't celebrate yet. Getting out of the chains was only the first step. They still had to get out of the locked cage, and then they had to survive in the desert without water or food. "Let me help you," Elena whispered to Rosa, starting to work on her chains next. Rosa's lock was different, more complicated. Elena had to try several different ways of pushing with the nail before she heard the click that meant success. Rosa rubbed her wrists where the iron had left red marks and smiled for the first time since Elena had met her. Carmen's chains came off easier, but Diego's lock was giving Elena trouble. The nail was starting to bend from all the use, and she was afraid it might break before she could free the boy. "It's okay," Diego said. "Save yourself. Don't worry about me. Nobody gets left behind," Elena said firmly. "That's not how this works." She tried a different angle with the nail and finally felt the lock give way. All 4 prisoners were now free from their chains, but they were still locked in the cage with 3 dangerous men just a few feet away. Elena looked around the cage for anything they could use as weapons. There wasn't much, just some old rope and a broken piece of wood. But Rosa found something useful tucked in a corner, a small metal cup that one of the previous prisoners must have left behind. "We can use this to make noise," Rosa suggested. "Maybe distract them somehow." Elena studied the lock on the cage door. It was bigger and more complicated than the chain locks, but it worked on the same basic idea. She started working with her bent nail, but this lock was fighting her every step of the way. One of the guards walked over to check on them, and Elena quickly hid the nail while the others pretended to still be chained. The guard was half asleep and didn't notice that they weren't actually connected to the iron anymore. "Lazy prisoners," he muttered, still sleeping like babies. After he walked away, Elena went back to work on the cage lock. Sweat dripped down her face as she struggled with the mechanism. The nail was definitely getting weaker, and she could feel it starting to bend in ways that would make it useless. "Almost got it," she whispered, though she wasn't sure that was true. Then she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. Morrison was waking up. He sat up by the dead campfire, looked around the camp, and his eyes stopped on the cage. Even from a distance, Elena could tell something had caught his attention. "Hey," Morrison shouted, getting to his feet. "Something's wrong with the prisoners." Elena's heart hammered in her chest as Morrison walked toward the cage, his boots heavy on the packed dirt. She tried desperately to make the lock work, pushing the nail in every direction she could think of. Morrison reached the cage and saw immediately that they were no longer chained. His face turned red with anger and he started screaming for the other guards. They got out of their chains. How did they get out of their chains? The other 2 guards came running, grabbing their rifles as they moved. Elena knew they were out of time. She gave the nail one last desperate push, and miracle of miracles, the cage lock clicked open. "Run!" Elena shouted, throwing open the cage door. But as they stumbled out of the wagon, Morrison was already there waiting for them. He grabbed Rosa by the arm and threw her to the ground. One of the other guards pointed his rifle at Carmen and Diego. "Thought you were clever, did you?" Morrison snarled, pulling a long whip from his belt. "Let me show you what happens to prisoners who try to escape." Elena stepped in front of Rosa, facing Morrison even though she had no weapons and no way to fight him. "Leave her alone. I'm the one who picked the locks. Morrison smiled, but it was the kind of smile that promised pain. Oh, don't worry. You'll all get what you deserve. But you first, since you're so eager. He raised the whip above his head, and Elena closed her eyes, waiting for the pain she knew was coming. But the pain never came. Instead, she heard a sound like wind rushing through trees, followed by a wet thunk. When she opened her eyes, Morrison was staring down at an arrow sticking out of his chest. His face showed complete surprise, like he couldn't understand what had happened to him. The whip fell from his hand as he collapsed to his knees, then fell forward into the dirt. The other two guards spun around, trying to see where the arrow had come from, but the desert looked empty in every direction. "Show yourself," one of them screamed. "Come out and fight like a man." Another arrow came from nowhere, taking down the second guard before he could even raise his rifle. The third guard fired wildly into the empty air, but there was nothing to shoot at. Then Elena saw him. A man emerged from behind the rocks like he had been part of the desert itself. He was tall and lean, with long dark hair and clothes that seemed to blend with the landscape around him. In his hands was a bow, and strapped to his back was a quiver full of arrows. The last guard turned his rifle toward this new threat, but before he could pull the trigger, a third arrow found its mark. The guard dropped without making a sound. Elena, Rosa, Carmen, and Diego stood in the sudden silence, staring at the man who had saved their lives. He looked at each of them in turn, his dark eyes checking to make sure they weren't hurt. Finally, his gaze settled on Elena. He saw the broken chains at her feet, saw the bent nail still clutched in her bleeding hand, saw the way she had stood between Morrison and the others. The man said something in a language Elena didn't understand, but his tone was gentle. Then in English that was clear but accented, he spoke the words that would change everything. "She walks with me." Elena stared at the man who had spoken those words. "She walks with me." The way he said it, calm and certain, made it sound less like a question and more like a decision that had already been made. Around them, the 3 slave traders lay dead in the morning sand. Morrison's whip was still coiled near his body, and Elena thought about how close she had come to feeling it across her back. This stranger had saved not just her life, but her dignity, maybe even her soul. "Who are you?" she asked, though something told her the answer might change everything. "I am Dakota," he said, slinging his bow across his shoulder. "I have been following these men for many days." Rosa, Carmen, and Diego huddled together near the wagon, still shocked by how quickly everything had changed. One moment they were about to be beaten or worse, and the next moment their captors were dead, and a mysterious archer was offering to protect them. "You're Apache," Carmen said. It wasn't a question. Everyone in the territory knew about the Apache, though most of what they knew came from stories that were probably more fear than fact. Dakota nodded. "These men took people from my land, from my people. They would have taken more if I had not stopped them." Elena looked down at the broken chains around her feet, then back up at Dakota. "Why did you say I walk with you?" "You don't even know me." Dakota's dark eyes studied her face. "I watched you last night. I saw you share your food with the boy when you had little for yourself. I saw you comfort the woman when she cried. I saw you work all night to free not just yourself, but all of them." He gestured toward the others. "That tells me who you are." "But I'm not Apache," Elena said. "I'm not your people. People who care for others, people who fight for freedom. These are my people, no matter what blood runs in their veins." Rosa stepped forward nervously. "What about us? What happens to us now?" Dakota looked at the 3 of them, Rosa, Carmen, and young Diego. "You can come with me to the Apache camp. You will be safe there. Or I can help you find your way back to your homes if you have homes to return to." Carmen shook her head. "I have no home. My husband sold me to pay his drinking debts. My family is dead," Rosa said quietly. "The same fever that killed Elena's parents took mine too. That's why it was so easy for the traders to take me." Diego looked at the ground. "I can't go back. My uncle will just sell me again if I do." Elena realized that all of them were in the same situation she was. They had been betrayed by people who should have protected them. Going back to their old lives wasn't really an option, because those lives had been destroyed the moment someone put chains on them. "What about you?" Dakota asked Elena. "Do you have a home to return to?" Elena thought about Carlos, about the money he had taken for selling her. She thought about the ranch that would probably be gone by now, sold to pay debts. Even if she went back, Even if Carlos begged for forgiveness, how could she ever trust him again? No, she said finally. I don't have a home anymore either. Dakota nodded like this was what he had expected to hear. Then you all walk with me. We will go to my people, and you will decide what kind of life you want to build from there. He began gathering supplies from the dead men's camp. Water, food, weapons, blankets, everything they would need to survive the journey through the desert. Is it far? Rosa asked. The Apache camp? 3 days if we travel smart, Dakota said. But first we need to bury these men. Even bad men deserve to return to the earth properly. Elena was surprised by this. After what Morrison and his men had planned to do to them, she felt they deserved to be left for the vultures and coyotes. But she helped dig the graves anyway because Dakota was right. Showing respect for the dead was about who they were, not who the dead men had been. As they worked, Dakota told them about the Apache way of life. He explained that his people lived in small bands, moving with the seasons, taking only what they needed from the land and giving back whenever they could. It will be different from the life you knew, he warned them. We have no farms, no towns, no churches like the Mexican and American settlements. Some of you might find it too hard. Harder than being sold like cattle? Carmen asked. I don't think so. Diego looked up from the grave he was helping to dig. Will your people accept us? We're not Apache. My people understand what it means to lose everything, Dakota said. They understand what it means to be hunted and driven from your homes. You will be welcome. Elena found herself watching Dakota as he worked. He moved with a quiet confidence that reminded her of her father. But there was something else too, a sadness in his eyes that she recognized because she felt it in her own heart. You lost someone, she said suddenly. Someone was taken from you too. Dakota stopped digging and looked at her. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, my sister. A year ago. I have been hunting the men who took her ever since. Did you find her? No, but I found others. I saved others. Sometimes that has to be enough. Elena understood. Sometimes saving people you could help was the only way to live with the people you couldn't save. After they finished burying the dead, Dakota gathered them together. Before we leave this place, he said, you need to understand something. Once we walk away from here, your old lives are finished. The people you were before today, those people are dead and buried with these men. You will need new names, new stories, new ways of thinking about who you are. What do you mean? Rosa asked. Elena Martinez, the rancher's daughter, she died when her brother put chains on her. Carmen Valdez, the farmer's wife. She died when her husband sold her for drinking money. You cannot go back to being those people. Because those people lived in a world where family could be trusted and homes were safe. That world is gone for you now. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. She knew Dakota was right. Even if Carlos came looking for her, even if he begged her to forgive him, she could never be his little sister again. That Elena had believed in family loyalty and the safety of home. This Elena knew better. So who do we become? She asked. Dakota smiled for the first time since she had met him. That is for you to decide. Among my people, you will earn new names based on who you choose to be, not who you used to be. He shouldered his pack and started walking toward the mountains in the distance. Come. We have a long journey ahead of us, and the desert is not kind to those who travel in the heat of the day. Elena looked back once at the graves they had dug, at the abandoned trading post, at the wagon with its broken chains scattered in the dust. Then she turned and followed Dakota into the desert, leaving her old life behind with every step. Rosa, Carmen, and Diego walked beside her, 4 people who had been prisoners at sunrise and were free by midday. They didn't know what waited for them in the Apache camp, but they knew it had to be better than what they were leaving behind. As they walked, Elena heard Dakota singing softly in his own language. She didn't understand the words, but the tune sounded like freedom. The desert was nothing like Elena had expected. She thought it would be empty and lifeless, just sand and rocks under a burning sun. But as she followed Dakota deeper into Apache territory, she began to see that the desert was full of secrets, if you knew where to look. On their first day of walking, when the sun was climbing high and Elena felt like her tongue was turning to leather, Dakota stopped beside what looked like just another pile of rocks. Water, he said, kneeling down and moving some of the stones aside. Elena couldn't believe it. Hidden underneath was a small pool of clean, sweet water, It wasn't much, but it was enough to fill their water bottles and cool their burning throats. How did you know? Rosa asked, her voice full of wonder. Dakota pointed to some tiny green plants growing between the rocks. The desert tells you where to find what you need. You just have to learn its language. Elena knelt down beside the hidden spring and studied the plants Dakota had pointed to. They were small and easy to miss, but now that she knew what to look for, she could see them clearly. What else does the desert tell you? Everything, Dakota said. Which direction the wind will blow, where animals go to drink when storms are coming. The desert is a teacher, if you are willing to be a student. As they continued their journey, Elena found herself walking closer to Dakota, asking questions about everything they saw. She learned that the twisted Joshua trees marked old water sources, that certain cacti could be cut open for their moisture, that some rocks held heat long after the sun went down and could keep you warm through the cold desert night. You learn fast, Dakota observed as Elena correctly identified tracks left by a family of javelinas. I had to learn fast on the ranch, Elena said. My father always said that knowledge was the only thing nobody could take away from you. Your father was wise, Dakota said, though men like Morrison try to take even that. Elena thought about this as they walked. Morrison and his men had tried to take her freedom, her dignity, her future. But they couldn't take what she had learned about horses, about fixing things, about reading the sky for weather signs. Those skills were still hers, and now Dakota was teaching her new ones. On their second day, when Diego complained that his feet hurt and he was tired of walking, Dakota showed them all how to move across the desert without leaving clear tracks. Step on rocks when you can, he explained, demonstrating a way of walking that seemed to flow like water over stone. Disturb as little as possible. A good tracker can follow you for days if you're not careful. Elena practiced the technique, finding that it reminded her of walking through her mother's garden without stepping on the plants. It was about being aware of where you put your feet, about moving with respect for what was around you. Why is it important not to leave tracks? Carmen asked. Because there are still men like Morrison out there, Dakota said grimly. The desert is safer than the towns, but it is not completely safe. That evening, as they made camp in a sheltered canyon, Dakota taught them how to build a fire that couldn't be seen from far away. Elena watched carefully as he arranged the wood and stones in a way that contained the light and scattered the smoke. Back home, I just threw wood together and lit it, she admitted. I never thought about who might be watching. On the ranch, you had walls and neighbors, Dakota said. Here, the desert is your only protection. You must learn to be invisible when you need to be. But Elena was learning more than just survival skills. She was also learning about Dakota himself. She noticed how he always made sure Rosa had enough water, how he found the easiest path for Diego's short legs, how he kept watch long into the night so the rest of them could sleep safely. You don't have to take care of all of us, Elena told him on their second night. When she woke up and found him sitting by the dying fire, alert and watchful. Yes, I do, he said simply. It is who I am. But who takes care of you? Dakota was quiet for a long moment. I learned to take care of myself when my sister was taken. Before that, we took care of each other. Elena sat down beside him, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders against the desert cold. Tell me about her, Ayana. Her name meant forever flowering. He paused, searching for the right words in English. She was like springtime, always finding beauty in small things, always making others smile. The children in our band loved her because she knew all the old stories. What happened to her? Slave traders like the ones who took you. But a different group, more careful, harder to track. By the time I found where they had camped, the trail was too old to follow. Elena heard the pain in his voice and understood why he had been so determined to save her and the others. I'm sorry. I tell myself that maybe she escaped like you did. Maybe someone helped her and she is living free somewhere. Dakota stared into the fire, but I do not know. Not knowing is its own kind of prison. Elena thought about Carlos, about how she might never see him again or know what became of him. Yes, it is. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead in the clear desert sky. Elena had never seen so many stars back at the ranch. The desert sky was like a blanket covered with tiny holes, letting heaven's light shine through. Dakota, she said finally, why did you really say I would walk with you? It wasn't just because I helped the others. He looked at her in the flickering firelight. You reminded me of Ayana, not the way you look, but the way you think of others before yourself. When I saw you working to free everyone's chains instead of just your own, he shrugged. It told me you were someone worth saving. And now? Now I think maybe you are someone worth learning from too. Elena felt something warm spread through her chest, warmer than the fire. Nobody had ever said she was worth learning from. Back at the ranch, she had always been the one learning from others. Her parents, the neighbors, even Carlos when he was teaching her to ride and rope. On their third day, Dakota began teaching Elena things that went beyond basic survival. He showed her how to read the flight patterns of birds to find water or detect danger. He taught her which plants could heal cuts and fever, and which ones could kill if you weren't careful. The desert is like a medicine cabinet, he explained as they walked. Everything you need is here, if you know where to look and how to use it. Elena found herself thinking in new ways, seeing connections between things she had never noticed before. The way wind carved patterns in rock was like the way water carved patterns in soil. The way certain plants grew only in specific places was like the way certain problems required specific solutions. You think like Apache now, Dakota observed when Elena correctly predicted where they would find the next water source. I think like someone who wants to survive, Elena corrected, and someone who wants to help others survive too. That afternoon they reached a high ridge that looked out over a green valley dotted with Apache camps. Smoke rose from cooking fires and Elena could see people moving between the scattered dwellings. My people, Dakota said with pride and affection in his voice. Elena looked down at the valley and felt nervous for the first time since they had started walking. Learning desert survival was one thing, but being accepted by a whole community was something else entirely. What if they don't want us? Rosa asked, voicing what they were all thinking. They will want you if I say you belong, Dakota said confidently, but belonging is something you will have to earn for yourselves. As they began the descent into the valley, Elena realized that the hardest part of her journey was just beginning. She had learned to survive in the desert, but now she had to learn to live among people who might see her as an outsider forever. But she had Dakota beside her, and she had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed. Whatever came next, she would face it the way she had faced everything else, with determination and hope. 6 months had passed since Elena first walked into the Apache camp with Dakota. The desert had tanned her skin dark brown, and her hands were strong and sure from the work of survival. She had learned to move through the landscape like water, to find medicine in plants, and to understand the language of wind and stone. The Apache people had given her a new name, Broken Chains Woman. At first, Elena thought it was because of the shackles Morrison had put on her, but the tribal elder who named her explained that it meant something deeper. You do not just break chains from your own wrists, the old woman had said. You break chains from the hearts and minds of others. This is a powerful gift. Elena had proven this was true. Rosa now helped the camp's healers and was learning to make medicines from desert plants. Carmen had become skilled at weaving and was teaching some of the Apache women new patterns she remembered from her childhood. Diego, who had grown 3 inches and put on healthy weight, was learning to hunt with the young Apache men. All of them had found their place among Dakota's people, but Elena had found something more. She had found a partner. Dakota and Elena worked together like they had been born to it. She helped him track slave traders and rescue their victims, while he taught her the deeper secrets of desert survival. When they brought new rescued people back to camp, Elena was the one who helped them adjust to their new life, but their happiness was not meant to last uninterrupted. It was Rosa who spotted them first, a group of riders coming up the valley from the south. She ran to find Elena, who was grinding corn with some of the other women. Elena, Rosa said breathlessly, there are American soldiers coming, and I think I saw your brother with them. Elena's blood turned cold. Carlos. After all this time, he had found her. But why had he brought soldiers? Dakota appeared at Elena's side as if he had materialized from the air. The whole camp was suddenly alive with activity, as the Apache prepared for whatever was coming. Children were moved to safe places while the warriors checked their weapons. How many? Dakota asked Rosa. Maybe 20 soldiers, and 3 or 4 other men who aren't wearing uniforms. Elena climbed to a high rock where she could see the approaching group. Her heart sank when she recognized the lead civilian rider. It was Carlos, looking older and thinner than when she had last seen him. Behind him rode a cavalry officer and about 15 soldiers. It's him, Elena confirmed. My brother. What do you want to do? Dakota asked quietly. Elena thought about running deeper into the mountains where the soldiers couldn't follow. She thought about hiding until they gave up and went away. But she was tired of running and she was tired of unfinished business. I want to talk to him, she said. I want to hear what excuse he has for bringing soldiers to threaten people who gave me sanctuary. The Apache chief, a dignified man named Cocheta, came to stand beside them. He had been kind to Elena and the other refugees, but she could see the hardness in his eyes as he watched the soldiers approach. They come with weapons to a peaceful camp, Cocheta said. This does not speak well of their intentions. Let me go down and meet them, Elena suggested. Maybe I can keep this from turning into a fight. You don't go alone, Dakota said firmly. If they want to talk, they can talk to both of us. Elena nodded. She and Dakota walked down the valley to meet the approaching group, stopping about 50 yards from the edge of the camp. Behind them, Elena could sense the Apache warriors taking positions among the rocks and trees, ready to protect their home if necessary. Carlos dismounted from his horse when he saw Elena approaching. She hardly recognized him. The guilt and shame of what he had done had carved deep lines in his face, and his eyes looked haunted. Elena, he called out. Thank God you're alive. No thanks to you, Elena replied, her voice hard as stone. The cavalry officer, a captain with gray hair and tired eyes, dismounted as well. Miss Martinez, I'm Captain Reynolds. Your brother has told us that you were kidnapped by hostile Apaches. We're here to bring you home safely. Elena almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Kidnapped? Is that what he told you? Elena, please, Carlos said, stepping closer. I know you're angry, but these people have filled your head with lies. You don't belong here. You belong with your own people, your own family. My own family? Elena's voice rose. My own family sold me to slave traders. My own brother put chains on my wrists and took money for my life. Captain Reynolds looked confused. He glanced between Elena and Carlos. What is she talking about, Martinez? Carlos's face went red. She's been with these savages for months, Captain. They've probably filled her head with all kinds of stories. The only savage I see here is you, Elena said coldly. These people saved my life. They gave me food, shelter, and respect when my own brother treated me like livestock. Dakota stepped forward, and Elena saw several soldiers reach for their weapons. I am Dakota, he said calmly. I speak for this band. Your soldier speaks of kidnapping, but this woman came to us freely after I freed her from slave traders. Slave traders? Captain Reynolds' voice sharpened. What slave traders? The ones her brother sold her to, Dakota said simply. Carlos started to protest, but Captain Reynolds held up his hand. The captain had been in the territory long enough to know the difference between truth and lies, and something about Elena's story rang true. Is this accurate, Miss Martinez? The captain asked Elena directly. Did your brother sell you to slave traders? Elena looked Carlos straight in the eyes. He did, for $500, to a man named Morrison who planned to sell me to brothels in Mexico. Carlos broke down then, falling to his knees in the desert sand. I didn't have a choice, Elena. We were going to lose everything. I thought maybe you could escape, maybe you could make a better life somewhere else. By being sold like an animal? Elena's voice cracked with old pain and fresh anger. By being chained and caged and treated worse than cattle? I'm sorry. Carlos sobbed. I've regretted it every day since you left. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The money didn't help, I lost the ranch anyway. I've been looking for you for months, trying to make it right. Captain Reynolds looked disgusted. Martinez, are you telling me you brought us out here under false pretenses? That you lied about your sister being kidnapped? I thought... Carlos struggled to find words. I thought if I could get her back, if I could bring her home, maybe she could forgive me. Elena felt Dakota's presence beside her, steady and strong. She looked around at the Apache camp behind them, at the people who had become her real family. Then she looked back at Carlos kneeling in the dirt, broken by his own choices. There is no home to go back to, Carlos, she said quietly. You destroyed our home when you put those chains on me. You killed the sister you're trying to save when you took Morrison's money. But we're family, Carlos pleaded. Blood family, Elena shook her head. Family doesn't sell family. These people are my family now. This Apache warrior standing beside me has shown me more loyalty in 6 months than you showed me in 20 years of being your sister. She turned to Captain Reynolds. Captain, I want you to understand something clearly. I was not kidnapped. I was rescued. I am here by my own choice, and I am staying by my own choice. Captain Reynolds nodded slowly. I can see that, miss, and I apologize for the deception that brought us here. He turned to Carlos with disgust. Martinez, you wasted government time and resources with your lies. Consider yourself lucky I don't have you arrested. As the soldiers prepared to leave, Carlos made one last desperate attempt. Elena, please. I know I did wrong, but I'm trying to make it right. Come home with me. We can start over. Elena looked at her brother for a long moment, feeling a mixture of pity and sadness. The man who had once protected her from thunderstorms and taught her to ride horses was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. Goodbye, Carlos, she said finally. I hope you find peace with what you've done, because I have found peace with who I've become. She turned and walked back toward the Apache camp, Dakota beside her. Behind them, she heard Carlos calling her name, but she didn't look back. Are you all right? Dakota asked quietly. I am, Elena said, and realized she meant it. For the first time since this all started, I really am all right. As they reached the camp, the Apache people came out to greet them, welcoming them back like the family they had become. Elena looked around at these faces. Rosa laughing with the children, Carmen showing off a new weaving pattern, Diego practicing with his bow. This was home now. This was family, and no one would ever put chains on any of them again. 2 years had passed since Carlos rode away with the cavalry, and Elena had become a legend among the scattered Apache bands. They called her Broken Chains Woman, and when people heard that name, they knew it meant hope. Elena and Dakota had rescued dozens of people from slave traders. Using the knowledge Elena had gained from her own captivity, she understood how the traders thought, where they made camp, what mistakes they always made. Combined with Dakota's tracking skills and knowledge of the desert, they had become a force that struck fear into the hearts of anyone who made money from human suffering. But their work went beyond just rescuing people. Elena had become something like a bridge between two worlds. The Apache world she had chosen, and the Mexican-American world she had been born into. When rescued captives came to the Apache camps, many of them struggled to adapt to such a different way of life. Elena helped them find their place. Some, like Rosa, stayed with the Apache permanently and became valued members of the community. Others, like Carmen, eventually chose to return to settlements but carried with them a new understanding of what it meant to be free. A few, like Diego, moved between both worlds, serving as messengers and guides for other refugees. Elena's reputation had spread beyond the Apache camps. Mexican and American settlers who opposed slavery began to seek her out, asking for help in rescuing family members or friends who had been taken. She was careful about these requests. Some were genuine, but others came from people who were just as bad as the slave traders themselves. You've changed more than just your own life, Dakota told her one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of gold and red. You've changed how people think about what's possible. Elena leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. They had been married in the Apache way for over a year now, their union blessed by the tribal elders and celebrated by the entire band. It was a partnership built on shared purpose and mutual respect, stronger than any chains that had ever bound her. We've changed it, she corrected. You taught me how to survive. I just learned how to help others do the same. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, one of the young Apache men who carried news between the different bands. He looked worried as he approached their fire. Broken Chains Woman, he said formally. Dakota, I bring news from the east. The American government is making new laws. They say all Apache must move to reservations. Elena's heart sank. She had heard rumors of this for months, but had hoped it would never actually happen. Reservations were just another kind of prison, a way to control people by limiting where they could go and how they could live. How long do we have? Dakota asked. The soldiers will come in the spring. Any Apache found off the reservations after that will be considered hostile and treated as enemies. Elena felt anger burning in her chest. These people had given her freedom when her own family had tried to sell her into slavery. They had shared their knowledge, their resources, their very identity with her. Now the government wanted to put them in cages just like Morrison had tried to do to her. What will you do? She asked Dakota. He stared into the fire for a long time before answering. My people have always moved with the seasons, followed the game, lived as the land allowed us to live. The reservation will be like death for us, slow death in small pieces. So you'll resist? Some will. Some will fight until the soldiers kill them rather than accept the reservation. Others will go peacefully, hoping to keep their families safe. He looked at her. What will you do? Elena had been dreading this question, though she had known it would come eventually. As a Mexican-American woman, she could probably avoid being forced onto the reservation. She could go back to the settlements, maybe even find work in one of the towns. She would be safe, but safety had never been what mattered most to her. I go where you go, she said firmly. Your people are my people now. Your fight is my fight. Dakota smiled, but there was sadness in it. The reservation will be hard for you, harder than the desert ever was. They will try to make you forget everything you learned here, everything you became. Let them try, Elena said. I've been in chains before. I know how to break them. Over the following months, Elena threw herself into preparing for what was coming. She worked with the tribal elders to preserve as much Apache knowledge as possible, learning healing songs and traditional stories that might be lost if they weren't remembered. She also began teaching some of the younger Apache women to read and write in English and Spanish, skills that might help them navigate the world they were being forced into. When spring came, the soldiers arrived as promised, but instead of just military men, there were also Indian agents, government officials whose job was to manage life on the reservations. Elena saw an opportunity. She had learned to speak Apache fluently, and her knowledge of both English and Spanish made her valuable as an interpreter. More importantly, she understood both cultures in a way that few people did. When the Indian agents needed someone to help communicate with the Apache, Elena volunteered. It wasn't an easy decision. Some of the Apache saw working with the government as betrayal, even if the goal was to help their people. But Elena had learned something important during her time in chains. Sometimes the only way to fight a system was from the inside. On the reservation, Elena found herself walking a difficult line. During the day, she worked with the Indian agents, translating not just language but cultural concepts that the government officials couldn't understand. She helped negotiate for better living conditions, more food, and permission for the Apache to continue some of their traditional practices. At night, she worked with Dakota and others to preserve their true culture. They told the old stories in whispered voices, practiced traditional medicines in secret, and planned for a future when they might be free again. Elena also continued her work rescuing slaves, though now it was more dangerous and had to be done in complete secrecy. The reservation was watched closely, but Elena had learned to be invisible when she needed to be. She slipped away during the night, met with contacts in nearby towns, and brought back information about people who needed help. Years passed. Elena became known among government officials as a valuable resource, someone who could help them understand the Apache and prevent conflicts. She used this reputation to protect her people in small ways, arguing for better treatment and more freedoms whenever she could. But she was also building something larger, a network of people, former slaves she had rescued, sympathetic settlers, even some government officials who genuinely wanted to help, who worked together to fight human trafficking throughout the territory. Diego, now a grown man, had become one of her most trusted allies. He moved freely between the reservation and the outside world, carrying messages and coordinating rescues. Rosa had married an Apache man and was raising children who spoke 3 languages and understood that freedom was something worth fighting for. Even Carmen, who had returned to Mexican settlements, sent information about slave traders operating near the border. The network Elena had helped create stretched across hundreds of miles and included people of many different backgrounds, all united by the belief that no one should ever be bought or sold. One day, nearly 10 years after Elena had first walked into the Apache camp, a young woman arrived at the reservation asking for Broken Chains Woman. She was thin and scared, with marks on her wrists that Elena recognized immediately. They told me in the settlement that you help people like me, the young woman said in Spanish. People who escaped from the traders. Elena looked at this girl who reminded her so much of herself all those years ago, and she felt the familiar fire of determination burning in her chest. What's your name? Elena asked gently. I don't know anymore, the girl replied. The traders called me so many different things I forgot my real name. Elena took the girl's hands in her own. Then we'll find you a new name. A name that means freedom instead of chains. As Elena led the young woman toward the house she shared with Dakota, she reflected on the strange path her life had taken. She had been betrayed by family, chained like an animal, and stripped of everything she thought she knew about herself. But from those ashes, she had built a new life, based on purpose, rather than circumstance. She had found love with a man who saw her as an equal partner. She had helped dozens of people find freedom and hope. She had become a voice for those who had no voice. The chains Morrison had put on her wrists had been broken years ago, but Elena understood now that the most important chains she had broken were the ones around her own mind. The chains of fear, of helplessness, of believing that she was powerless to change her circumstances. As the sun set over the desert that had taught her so much, Elena looked at the young woman beside her and smiled. Tomorrow they would begin the work of breaking another set of chains. And the day after that there would be someone else who needed help. The work was never finished, but Elena had learned that the work itself was what made life worth living. She had walked into this desert as a victim, but she had become something much more powerful. A person who helped others find their own strength. She was Broken Chains Woman, and she was finally, truly free.